Canada's economy just crossed a line, and almost nobody's talking about it yet. Right now, beneath the surface of those cheerful GDP reports and rosy government press releases, something dangerous is brewing. And if you know where to look, the warning signs are everywhere. The cracks are widening, the pressure is building, and when the system finally snaps, the fallout will blindside even the experts who saw it coming. So what happens next exactly? That's what we need to talk about, because the clock is ticking. When the US suddenly slammed tariffs on imports, Canada didn't just face higher costs, it faced an identity crisis. For decades, Canada built its entire playbook around trade with America. Nearly 70% of Canadian exports head south of the border. So when Trump flipped a switch on reciprocal tariffs earlier this year, it wasn't a minor irritation. It was a wrecking ball. Here's what actually happened. US firms raced to import goods before the tariffs kicked in, creating a sugar rush before Canadian exports in the first quarter. GDP grew 2.2%. Economists breathed easy. Then, April arrived, and the real picture emerged. Exports collapsed, manufacturing cratered. The second quarter saw Canada's economy actually contract by 0.4%, the worst quarterly decline in 9 years outside the pandemic. Suddenly, the cheerleading stopped. Trade got so messy that Canada's merchandise trade deficit with the world hit record levels. Exports to the US fell 3.4% in a single month. The countries that were supposed to be alternatives, that is India, China, stepped in. But they dictate the terms. Russian-style discounts, fierce competition, no real partnership, just survival. Manufacturing employment took the hardest hit. April 2025 saw the single largest one-month drop in manufacturing jobs since the pandemic. Nearly 33,000 positions vanished in a matter of weeks. And if this shocks you, wait until you see what the ripple effects are about to do. If you're watching this and wondering how bad it's going to get, you're not alone. That's exactly why you need to like and subscribe to stay in the loop. Canada's housing debt isn't just high. It's the highest amongst the world's 10 largest economies. Now think about that for a second. Higher than Britain, higher than the United States, higher than Germany. At over 100% of GDP for a full decade now, Canada's households are essentially carrying the weight of the entire economy on their shoulders. The real nightmare? About 75% of all household debt is tied to mortgages. Nearly $2.6 trillion of Canadians' $3.07 trillion in debt comes from the home loans. That's not just a number. That's a vulnerability size of a meteor. Here's where it truly gets terrifying. Approximately 2.2 million mortgages need renewal between 2024 and 2025. Those people borrowed money back when rates were at historic lows. Some locked in rates around 1% or even lower. When those mortgages came due, the Bank of Canada had already raised rates to 5%. Even after cutting rates this year, renewal still means shock payments. Canadians who renewed in late 2024 saw monthly mortgage payments jump by an average of $457. In Ontario and British Columbia, average increases exceeded $680. That's not cushion money. That's the difference between stable and survival mode for most households. And the debt-to-income ratio keeps climbing. In the first quarter of 2025, it hit 173.9%. That means for every dollar of disposable income, Canadians owe $1.74 in credit market debt. Income is barely growing, and debt just keeps piling up. The danger isn't theoretical anymore. Delinquency rates are already spiking. In Ontario, non-mortgage delinquency rates jumped 46.1% compared to the same period a year earlier. Younger households and lower-income families are falling behind first. When people start choosing between groceries and mortgage payments, the financial system gets nervous. But wait until you see what's happening to the one thing that's supposed to help them make those payments in the first place. Most headlines say unemployment is stable, around 6.9%. Don't believe it. That number hides what's actually happening underneath. Youth unemployment reached 14.7% in October, but that doesn't capture the real horror. The summer of 2025 saw youth unemployment hit a 15-year high at 14.9%. Students looking for summer work faced the worst job market since before the global financial crisis. Nearly 18% of returning students couldn't find work, a number you'd normally see only during recessions. But young people aren't the only ones struggling. The average time it takes to find a job has stretched to 21.8 weeks, up from 18.4 weeks a year earlier. That's a month of extra searching while bills pile up. Nearly half of all unemployed people in May 2025 had never worked or hadn't worked in the previous 12 months. There aren't temporary layoffs. These are people falling out of the job market entirely. Manufacturing saw 33,000 jobs disappear in a single month. Construction is bleeding positions. Trade-exposed sectors are in freefall. Meanwhile, wage growth is cooling. Average hourly earnings slowed to 3.2% year over year. When unemployment rises and wages flatten, consumption weakens. When consumption weakens in an economy built on household spending, everything cracks. Wait until you see what's devouring disposable income before Canadians even get a chance to spend it. Here's the silent killer nobody talks about at dinner parties: household debt service ratios. This is the percentage of disposable income that goes to paying off debt. Right now, it's sitting at 14.9%. That doesn't sound terrifying until you realize what it means. Of every dollar a Canadian brings home after taxes, they're dedicating 14 cents to debt payments. Credit card debt is up 9.4% year over year. Auto loans are climbing. Home equity lines of credit are being tapped dry because people need cash just to survive. Consumer credit delinquencies are rising fastest amongst newcomers and younger workers, exactly the people who should be building financial security, not drowning in it. In the third quarter of 2024 and into 2025, 1 in 22 newcomers to Canada missed a credit payment, compared to 1 in 28 the year before. That's a 57% jump in missed payments among the country's newest residents. This isn't just financial data. This is the sound of household budget snapping. The debt service ratio hasn't exploded yet, but it's a lagging indicator. Households cut spending first. Debt payments come second. But when people have no discretionary spending left, when they're maxing out credit cards just to cover basics, the next economic shock triggers something more dangerous than spreadsheets can capture, and it's already begun. In the spring of 2025, consumer confidence plummeted. It wasn't gradual, it was a cliff. Canadians watched tariffs get announced. They watched jobs disappear. They watched house prices wobble and mortgage renewals send shockwaves through their finances. The result? Sentiment went from cautiously optimistic to legitimately nervous. Housing markets that were supposed to recover started wobbling in parts of the country. Even though interest rates were falling, households weren't rushing back to buy homes. Why? Because they were too busy managing debt and worrying about their jobs. Retail sales, which had been a bright spot, started showing weakness. Restaurant spending, which was strong, began to plateau. The Canadian consumer, the single most important engine in the entire economy since the global financial crisis, started pumping the brakes. And when the consumer stops spending, the economy stops growing. Worse, this confidence collapse could accelerate. Confidence is fragile. It takes years to build and seconds to destroy. Once people believe the economy is heading down, they stop spending not just because their finances got worse, but because their expectations got darker. That shift from things are okay to things are getting bad creates a self-reinforcing downward spiral that's almost impossible to reverse. But wait until you see the damage that mental shift has already carved into the foundation of Canada's entire economic expansion. Canada's GDP growth estimates have been slashed repeatedly this year. The OECD now projects growth of just 1% in 2025, down from earlier forecasts of 1.7%. That's not a minor revision. That's cutting expectations nearly in half. The second quarter saw actual contraction. That was after the first quarter was artificially pumped up by tariff front-running. Without that one-time boost, the economy would have been negative even then. Looking ahead, projections show growth limping along at 1.1% in 2026. That's barely above stalling speed. Most advanced economies consider 2% healthy baseline growth. Canada is stuck at half that. Exports are expected to decline throughout 2025. Business investment has pulled back dramatically. Firms are delaying or canceling projects because they are terrified of what tariff policy will do next. The uncertainty alone is acting like a wet blanket on the entire economy. When businesses don't invest, workers don't get raises. When workers don't get raises, they cut spending. When spending gets cut, growth dies. The math is brutally simple. Canada is stuck in a growth recession. Technically, not shrinking every quarter, but growing so slowly that unemployment keeps rising and real living standards keep falling. And if you think that sounds severe, nothing will prepare you for what comes next. Here's the secret factor almost nobody talks about. What happens if Canadians lose faith in the Canadian dollar? The currency has already been under pressure. Weak growth, low interest rates, and trade uncertainty have all weighed on the loonie. But imagine if that pressure accelerates. Imagine if the loonie drops sharply enough that ordinary Canadians start getting nervous about holding it. In that scenario, something breaks inside the financial system. People rush to convert savings into US dollars, euros, or anything else they see as safer. Banks get panicked calls, lending freezes. Suddenly, Canadian businesses can't get credit. Households can't refinance debt. The real economy grinds to a halt not because anything fundamentally changed, but because trust evaporated. This is called a confidence crisis, and once it starts, it's nearly impossible to stop. The Bank of Canada could print money. The government could announce rescue packages, but you can't manufacture trust. You can't legislate away fear once it takes hold. The dangerous part? We're closer to that line than most people realize. The economy is fragile. Households are over-leveraged. The labor market is softening. Trade policy is unpredictable. All it would take is one real shock, a major corporate failure, a banking scare, a geopolitical event, to flip sentiment from cautious to panicked. And when that happens, Canada doesn't just face a recession, it faces something closer to a financial crisis. Canada's economy didn't collapse overnight. It's been dying in slow motion, one quarter at a time. The trade war exposed vulnerabilities that were always there pretty much. Household debt, dependency on consumer spending, weak productivity, weak rate growth. The tariffs just hit them with a spotlight. Whether it's exports bleeding away, households drowning in debt, or confidence quietly evaporating, the system is more brittle than it looks. The government can boost spending, yes. The Bank of Canada can cut rates. But you can't fix a broken engine just by adding more oil. You have to rebuild it.